So the next speaker is Roman, and he's going to talk about scaling your Vue app. So that's pretty exciting as well. Thank you. Give it a round of applause.
First of all, good morning, everybody. I'm happy to be here. And yeah, today I want to talk about scaling Vue in an existing stack. So one of the challenges and one of the questions I hear quite often is, okay, how do I add something to an existing project that I have running? Because like working on greenfield projects is a luxury we don't have very often. Sometimes we have customers we have to maintain, and there's a lot of things we need to consider when adding Vue to an existing tech stack. And from the company standpoint, adding new tech is always a high investment. It's an investment based on it needs you to learn the new technology. It needs the company to say, okay, like, yeah, we want to go down that route. It needs like a lot of discussions. You need to maintain it. There's a lot of challenges that come along with it. The biggest question is also why do you want to adopt a new technology? Like, never try to say, okay, I want to adopt it because it's cool. Those should have a reason why you want to do it. Because eventually it will have a lot of costs on your company eventually and yourself. But it's also a very necessary one. And in case of something like Vue, it dramatically improves how we can do stuff on the front end, how we can build things, how we can manage our components and state and everything. So that's probably a risk worth taking sometimes. And eventually we want to, as engineers, we want to use the cool modern tools eventually anyway. What we need to realize then, though, is we will have competing tech that will run in parallel. So if you have something like Angular running, and then you add Vue to the stack, you basically have two libraries competing for, they want to serve a good UI, they want to render UI. So that needs a lot of like discussions in the team or so how you want to do it. And the biggest question there is always where to draw the line. That's a very hard question. It needs a lot of conversations inside the team to say, okay, like, how should we add it to the stack? Because let's say if you're the only front-end engineer doing it, and then you have like you got sicker at some point or so, others are also responsible for the code you're doing. And you don't want to kind of like break anything if you serve it to customers. So it's very hard to think about this in advance. And one thing I came to realize very fast is that a full single-page app is very often not a possibility in the beginning. Like even Vue is like, okay, it's super cool to build single-page apps, and we all want to go there like using APIs and have one SPA because we have full control over every aspect of the page. But it's very often not easy to do. So hi, I'm Kuba. I'm senior software engineer at CodeShip. Yeah, we're a CI/CD company. We got acquired last week by another company called CloudBeast, so we must do something right, what's cool. Yeah, you find me on Twitter at CodeBrio and our company at CodeShip on Twitter. So why am I here talking to you about this? And I can tell you, I've been there, I've done that, and we went through the whole process because we faced some challenges there. We had an old stack that was dictated by jQuery, Angular, CoffeeScript. It was an old Rails app, and we had really big performance issues. And we have customers that are waiting for it, and eventually we didn't have a lot of resources to really kind of go in there and kind of change the whole application, like do a feature freeze and then do it how long it ever takes. You really have to be very, very precautious in this one. And we had a large amount of users that use our app on an everyday basis, so it's very critical to kind of think in advance how you want to add the new technology. And also, that maybe sounds familiar, it's a very backend heavy system where people are used to having everything running on a server and then kind of using Vue. Okay, that's a funny conversations you have. And sometimes it feels, okay, it's you against kind of the team of backend engineers. It can be a challenge. What I can assure you though, so we adopted it at 0.11. So Vue wasn't a big name as it is today. So it was quite a challenge to say to people, hey, Vue looks really cool, we should use it. People say, oh, go with React. Everybody uses React. These days it's way easier because Vue is really established and not by accident, it's kind of one of the top competitors now. So it's awesome to work with it. And a lot of conversations happened. And eventually it was kind of like, was more going hand in hand with the team and everybody said, okay, that's really, really cool, we have something there. And I can only recommend or so if you want to do this, try to have your team on your side or so, and there will be super cool times ahead eventually. So when we come to adopting it, I can only say the best thing that worked for us is like splitting up into different phases. The whole process, it's quite challenging. It takes a lot. And as I said, you cannot feature freeze your app for 1 year and say, I'll port everything over to Vue. So let's split it up. And the first phase, I would call like reducing as much as possible. It maybe sounds a little boring, but actually like reducing, I have to emphasize, it's really, really important for whatever you do. Try to maybe, if you have multiple languages at one point in the app, like we had CoffeeScript and then a little bit of JavaScript and a little bit of ES6 or so. So try to eliminate the amount of languages because it will make life way easier in the long term. Also, try to remove all the unknowns. It sounds very like, okay, something. But the more you know about your app or so that they say like, okay, I'm not sure kind of which browsers I'm using or so try to have a good, clear understanding of everything that's happening in your app, every external library that you're using, because if something is not working well with you at one point, you don't want to be the one realizing in production as a, oops, I broke everything, so that's not fine. And along the way, maybe already try to refactor some bits and pieces. Refactor can be quite fun, so yeah. Like little things like we did, or so to give you some code examples. Classic thing, CoffeeScript, jQuery, clicking buttons, event stuff or so. You can either kind of go down the route and say, okay, I'll just port it over to JavaScript to eliminate the CoffeeScript component. But why not enjoy the refactoring and go one step further and even say, okay, like let's use ES6 and all its cool features that it provides for me already, and get rid of jQuery in the process as well. It makes it way easier. And eventually, with Vue, you will be way happier having a good code base like this. We're not dependent on a lot of DOM nodes everywhere. And then we're already at the fun phase, I would say. Where say we're ready to introduce Vue to our stack. So that's cool. The most important thing when you start adding Vue to your project in general, try to choose a low target. So choose something you're able to manage. Ideally, a feature where you say exactly know where it starts and where it ends. Don't try to use it maybe on a new feature, because like new features eventually always end up saying, okay, like I'm shifting priorities at one point, new feature comes in, new kind of point here and there. So that's quite a challenge, and eventually you maybe end up with having like Vue in a state where you're not entirely happy, because it's like always very experimental how to add it to the tech stack. And if you can eliminate the unknowns again or so, then you're very happy with having like a feature that you knew. And the important thing here is also to define one clear entry point for Vue. We had a lot of discussions where we say, oh, templates should not live in JavaScript. They should always come from the server, because the server knows best. I would say make a very clean decision or so, and make a clean cut and say, okay, this is where Vue handles it from here, and let the server out, and so take all the power that Vue offers you. The easiest way to get started actually with Vue is also to add it just right away from a CDN. Why not do that? And also try to use as much as possible from Vue what it offers out of the box for you. To give you some small example, we have a very small feature. Let's say it's going to status page and just fetches the status eventually and shows the user everything is fine, or there's like degraded performance on the backend for some reason, so you never know. And the code for this could be as simple as this one. Or just drop it in from the CDN, I write some Vue code, that's awesome. And that's about it. Also, please don't get hung up on the string template. It's like not a must-have. You can use the other template ways, you can use JSX, whatever you like. But just like for this ease of explaining, that's the easiest way of like getting something on a page and say, Vue takes care of it. The next challenge that we faced very often, and it's also a question I hear quite often, is, okay, how can I get data from my backend from anywhere into the Vue instance? And if you Google for it or so, you find a ton of really complex solutions, kind of hook into the Vue process here and there and there. Again, try to use what Vue offers for you right out of the box. And Vue has a very good lifecycle, for example. So the previous example, all we did here is we hook into our before mount function, because like there's the mounted point when Vue actually takes a template and replaces its entry point with the new template that you have created. So you lose what was there before. But before mount gives you actually access to the element on the page at the current state before we add it. So we can just read the data set of that element, the URL, pass it into a Vue instance, and suddenly we have the data on the page and can leverage everything that's there. So that's cool. The next step is a better build process. This was a very big fight for us. It's quite challenging. Not sure if anybody's worked with a lot of Rails engineers, but they're very opinionated about their build process and asset pipeline and this kind of stuff. So it was quite challenging to do this. But long story short, eventually Webpack is your friend. So I can only encourage you to look at something like Webpack. And luckily, Webpack plays really, really nice with Vue. So if we look at the old kind of build process that's mostly in place at many apps, you have something like, OK, all your JavaScript files are there, and you build them some way, and then you serve it to the app. So probably also your Vue file that you had on the page was just squashed into the stack at one point and got served to the same way. And I think that's a very good and easy way to get it running, to verify that Vue is working in production, that no customer sees any crashes or has performance issues. So that's super fine. But now we want to kind of improve the build stack. So let's add Webpack to the mix. And in this case, all we do is we really move all our Vue files over to Webpack. Let this one take place. Let it be our new kind of like perfect world for how we want to treat Vue files. And let Webpack build it and just serve it maybe in parallel with the other ones for now. But you have a very clean, separated way of building Vue and maintaining all the Vue files there. One important step, though, when you start building this kind of better build pipeline that you will be customized the way that you need it in your application, aim for a very clean separation eventually. Don't to have globals of the old code maybe bleed over in the other one, or say, OK, I have this global helper function, and I can just leverage in a new file because they live on the same page. Try to avoid this as much as possible, because at a later phase or so, this will kind of bite you again. And if you need to pour like legacy code over, like you had a super helpful library that you had used on your old pages, but you want to use it in the new Vue file as well, maybe again, try to use the time to refactor this a little bit, make it so that you're happy to live in the new code base, and port it over to a new Webpack build process. And that should be a good way to go. And also for us to go further in on the Vue ecosystem or so, it's a good way to just start introducing the Vue single file components to your stack. So the previous example would look something like this, basically. So the biggest challenge we have here is you need to mount Vue single file components a little bit different. Apparently it got way easier with Vue CLI 3. That's cool. But yeah, that's a good challenge. We'll see about this a little later. So the next big question is, are you ready? And the best answer you can always give, if somebody asks you, are you ready, always say, I'm born ready. That always helps. So let's build an SPA. OK. Some who paid attention, didn't you say, we don't build SPAs, they don't make sense? Yeah, I said a full SPA is probably not the best idea that we can have. But we still want to use Vue as good as possible, like use all its powers that it gives us. So why not build a SPA part of our application in general, like treat one page as an SPA? And eventually, you can have multiple pages and have like different SPAs living side by side in your application. Think of this like there's the page that manages all your billing system, like all the subscription stuff. That makes a lot of sense for an SPA. It will be quite complex eventually in the end anyway. So why not have this live on its own? Why not have another SPA that takes care of all the user generation or like the forms and everything? This could be its own SPA living side by side in the app. And also add with the part that we say, OK, we want to build SPA, we want to be very advanced in our approach. That's also another good point where we say, OK, let's really dive deep into the Vue ecosystem, everything that it has to offer us. There was a very good talk by Ed yesterday about the Vue ecosystem. But yeah, he will be somewhere around here and talk later. Ask him if you have any cool question about it. He knows a ton. The biggest advice I can give you is add Vuejs as soon as possible. There was this blog post by GitLab. They did a similar process. They were facing, okay, we have a large user base. They have a legacy application. It was running Rails, jQuery, CoffeeScript. Sounds familiar. And what they did is we want to adopt Vue as well. And they had a blog post where they wrote down 1 year experience after starting to adopt Vue. And they very much came to the conclusion, okay, add Vuejs. At first, they tried to use like the state management and components and everything and kind of pass it around with events and stuff. Eventually, this is not making you very happy. And it's also quite painful when you work with a lot of engineers on this. So if we revisit the build process, that would be the perfect opportunity for us to make one clear cut. To say, from now on, we will only serve either or. If we're on an old page, let's serve the old code. It's running, we know it's running, we don't want to break it. But from now on, we will make a better world for us, and we will serve only the Webpack files for us on the new pages, maybe. And we can make the Webpack build process a little bit more sophisticated, having different SPAs or different packs that you build that you will afterwards use on your pages. So that's fine. A very clear or short example how we managed to do it is this is a Slim and a PHP example that basically try to be the same things, just whatever syntax looks more familiar. It's a very clear entry point. We say, okay, from here on should live a Vue app. In this case, manage all the users on the page. And we just try, okay, let's automate as much as possible. So as soon as we add this one on the page, it will automatically load the correct pack from Webpack and serve it on that page only to live there. And the generated markup that, that lands on the page afterwards is very simple. It's like just a div tag, maybe. Then we come to the point, why do we do this? Because we also want to make it easier to pass in data from the outside world. And we saw a similar approach earlier. We say, okay, let's just really paste in what we have. Our server comes along with having like all the data on the page already. We were rendering the users in some way or the other already. If we have an API, that's even better for us. But if we do not have, like, let's make it simple. Like just pass it down to our Vue app and use it like that. So all that we need to do now with having this clean entry point is say we want to mount Vue, we want to add it to the store, or we want to add a store in general, and then we want to pass the data to our new instance. And the cleanest way that we figured out to work on a larger scale is we want to have one very clear entry point. And we create a function that's called app. What we do is we pass it the name of the application, I should call it, the root component, and maybe a store that we need on the page. So we start by adding Vuejs to the Vue instance right away, because we say we want to use Vuejs anyway on every page. So let's do this. And the next thing is we try to grab the node that's running on the page. Then that's a perfect stop or a point where you can say, I have maybe a default store, because maybe your app is very sophisticated. It has like some kind of needs on every page, like pulling some data, have certain getters, have certain methods, because you need to add something to the local storage, because you support mobile and want to have your app working offline as well. That's a perfect way where you can say, I use plugins and prepare the store in a certain way that I can leverage as much as possible. And then I just merge my new store for the page that's actually reflecting the state of the SPA on that one, so with the old one. And the next thing is we want to grab the data. The easiest way was, like, again, just use the data set. In this case, we just read all the data from the node that we have on the page. And then we try to parse whatever is possible as JSON, and the other one we just take as is. And eventually, as we prepare the props, that's when we say, OK, now we're ready to put everything on the instance on the page. So we create a new Vue app, add the store to it, and then eventually we just return and render the new Vue root component that we want to have. And the important piece here is that we now will pass the props directly to the root component. That could look something like this in production. We say, OK, we have the app, that's entry point. It uses the store. It uses the user's component as its root component. That maybe looks something like this. And the important piece here is that we then already pass like users and role, what we had as data attributes on our entry point. We take them here as props directly and have them available in the root instance from the get-go. So that's kind of a process that worked pretty well. And at this point, you're about ready to get to really scale the application and scale the process in general. So we have established maybe multiple SPAs on our page already in our application in general, and we have different kind of packs building those. And when you build those eventually, this doesn't mean, okay, this is only one pack, it has to live on each page. Why not reuse whatever is possible also? We have like a pack that's maybe served on this page, but then we have another pack that takes care of like list rendering maybe. Why not have this one run on a front page, and you maybe need it on an admin page as well. So feel free to reuse whatever you have, like treat it as part of the application. The other important piece is to make it really fluid for the whole team. If you're more than one person, just try to prepare some kind of scaffolding or generators. So it seems also to get a little easier with Vue CLI. Ideally, you can prepare some generators there. That would be cool. What we ended up doing is something using the Rails generators. It has something that comes right out of the box for me. We just created one that says, OK, I'll create all the Vue scaffolding file and all the code that you need. So all the thing you saw before with kind of mounting the Vue and the root instance and all the app and pulling in the store, this is something the generator can do for me. So creating a new feature, a new SPA inside my application takes me literally about 5 seconds. So that's nice. The important piece is going forward there and kind of really make it scale and make it reusable inside the team is try to back it up as much as possible by really good software patterns, try to follow the Vue best practices guidelines, and also specs. And you will hear a little more about specs today from Ed, so that should be fun. And if you go down the route completely, you can be sure there are like really good times ahead using Vue. For example, to give you some benefit, because like we said, OK, why are we doing this? Why do we want to add tech to our existing stack? There has to be some benefits. And for us, benefits were, for example, our test suite. We had a ton of acceptance tests verifying that the application was running. And because everything was very global, with a lot of jQuery and CoffeeScript and complex building everywhere, acceptance tests were the only thing that really helped us to say, OK, this is something we can deliver to our users on a good basis. What we ended up is having, like, we reduced the acceptance spec by a ton to say we have really the user stories eventually, that they give you very much confidence in what you're delivering eventually. But all the other things that we were testing before, we were giving this over to unit tests. Because Vue makes it so easy and so perfect to kind of really test all those little bits and pieces on their own. And now our test suite kind of was cut down in half almost in time. So instead of like 20 minutes in general, we're now down to 10 minutes to be able to deploy something to production, what's pretty cool. Also, the initial page load, it went down from 2 seconds to 0.25 seconds, just with having like one SPA running on one page. It's way faster. We don't need to load this much global code before. I mean, of course, there are ways to kind of split everything up in different ways with the other pack system maybe as well, to say, OK, I'll try to asynchronously load all the files. But it can be very challenging. And by going the SPA approach and having like one living on one page, we had really great advantages out of this one. The other thing, if you want to start scaling your team, that was one of the big challenges. We had a lot of backend engineers to say, like, I don't touch JavaScript. I hate JavaScript. CoffeeScript doesn't make it more approachable in general, but Vue and ES6 and everything going down the route, this allowed us to kind of having something where everybody felt comfortable in working on. Backend engineers say, OK, that looks like very simple JavaScript. I feel like I can control what's happening on the page. And eventually, we were able to scale the team and say we have multiple people working on different features at the same time, all done by kind of really splitting it up in different processes. And the good thing is, Vue made this whole challenge, this whole journey, very enjoyable. And that's because it's basically just JavaScript done right. So thanks.